I'm going to be honest with you. As someone who cannot function without my morning coffee, my heart goes out to Americans right now because thanks to Donald Trump's latest tariff move, your cup of joe is about to get a lot more expensive, and it could start happening in just weeks. Trump has hit Brazil with a massive 50% tariff on beef, coffee, and oranges, and within hours, China stepped in with a huge show of support for Brazil, fast tracking Brazilian coffee into its own market. This isn't just a trade spat, this is geopolitics in your mug. Let's break down why this happened, what it means for Brazil, why China is loving this, and why US coffee drinkers might be the first casualties. Here's the part that's got trade experts scratching their head. The US actually runs a trade surplus with Brazil. In other words, America sells more to Brazil than it buys. So tariffs like this by Trump are usually used against countries with big trade surpluses that are against US. But this one's political. Trump's global tariff regime started back in April. His promise penalized countries that take advantage of the US. But this round had nothing to do with trade numbers and everything to do with Brazil's internal politics. Brazilian President Lula recently refused to bow to US pressure over the arrest of former President Bolsonaro, a Trump ally accused of plotting a coup. Lula's blunt response to Trump criticism was Trump was elected to be the President of the United States, not the Emperor of the world. Yeah, that's not exactly the kind of thing Trump takes well. Enter China. And they didn't waste time. Foreign Minister Wang Yi made a very public declaration of support for Brazil, saying China firmly supports Brazil in defending its sovereignty, resisting bullying tariffs, and strengthening global South unity. And here's the key, this isn't just talk. Beijing had already approved import licenses for 183 Brazilian coffee producers, tariff free to sell directly into China. Why does this matter? Because China's coffee market is exploding, and in the past few years, chains like Luckin Coffee have made coffee a daily habit for millions of Chinese consumers. Brazil now has an eager, growing market that can soak up much of the coffee they were selling to the US. And this is exactly the kind of story where the headlines don't tell you the whole truth. If you want more reasonable, rational explanations of complex geopolitical moves without the noise, hit the subscribe button right now. You'll get analysis that actually makes sense of how these events shape the world. Now, here's the reality. The United States buys about 8 million bags of Brazilian coffee every year. That's roughly 1/3 of Brazil's entire coffee output. That flow is about to be severely disrupted. American roasters will now have to scramble to replace that supply, turning to Colombia, Vietnam, and other producers. But there are problems. Colombia has higher prices and smaller supply that can't fill this void. Vietnam, mostly Robusta beans, not the Arabica that is served in every Starbucks and dominates the US coffee culture. The immediate result, the prices will rise, and as any coffee drinker knows, you can skip dessert, you can skip Netflix, but skipping coffee, that's a non-starter. Now, to understand the bigger picture, it's worth noting that Brazil is the world's largest coffee exporter, and it's also a major supplier of beef, soybeans, and orange juice to the US. But here's the twist. The US sells a lot of high value goods to Brazil, from machinery to chemicals to tech products. That's why the trade balance is in America's favor. So these tariffs aren't about protecting US farmers, they're about punishing a government that didn't toe Washington or Trump's political line. Historically, Brazil and the US have had a pragmatic but sometimes tense relationship. Washington has long seen Brazil as a key agricultural partner, but also as a competitor in global markets, especially when Brazil teams up with China. Wang Yi's remarks about BRICS unity aren't just fluff. In recent years, BRICS countries Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa have been openly trying to create alternatives to Western dominated trade and finance systems. Moves like this, China bailing out a BRICS partner hurt by US tariffs, send a very clear message. The global south doesn't have to play by Washington's rules anymore. And the more that developing nations turn to each other for trade, the less effective the US tariff threat becomes. Interestingly, Trump has been speaking more favorably about China lately, perhaps hoping to keep them from siding with Brazil. That didn't work. Instead, Beijing moved fast, locked in new trade deals, and left US importers holding the bag. The bottom line, China and Brazil win, American coffee drinkers and plenty of US businesses lose. So, will Trump regret this, or is this just the first shot in a much bigger economic fight between the US and the global south? Let me know what you think in the comments. I read them all. And if you value reasonable, rational explanations of complicated geopolitical events without the propaganda, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, if you excuse me, I need a coffee, because if there's one thing I've learned covering geopolitics, I can survive a trade war, but not without caffeine.